My youngest son betrayed his brother with his 6-year girlfriend. When he announced he'd marry her, I took his $120,000 inheritance, and now he blames me for ruining his life. I'm 55 years old. I've been working in accounting for like 25 years, and I need to tell this story because what happened in my family last year basically destroyed any idea I had about what it meant to be a close-knit family. My wife Susan and I raised 2 sons, Nicholas and Austin, and we always thought we'd done a good job, you know. We gave them love, education, values, everything parents are supposed to give. I never imagined the day would come when I'd have to throw it in one of my son's faces that he betrayed his own brother in the most horrible way possible. But here I am, trying to process how my younger son decided that sleeping with his older brother's girlfriend was a good idea. And then, as if that wasn't enough, trying to marry her. I guess I should start at the beginning, when things still seemed normal. Nicholas, my oldest son, is 28 now, and Austin is 25. They always had a normal brother relationship. You know, they'd fight when they were kids over silly things, competed a bit in sports and school, but nothing out of the ordinary. Nicholas was always the more responsible of the two, like the one who got good grades without anyone having to pressure him, the one who called home every week when he went off to college. Austin was more laid back, more sociable maybe, but also a good kid, or so we thought. There were never signs of any deep resentment between them, no toxic rivalry, nothing that made us think something like this could happen. Nicholas met Hannah like 6 years ago, when he was in college in another state. She was studying there too. I think engineering or something like that. I don't remember exactly. And what I do remember is that Nicholas was completely in love with her from the start. Every time we talked on the phone, he'd tell us about Hannah, Hannah this, Hannah that, and we were happy for him because you could tell he was genuinely happy. We met her formally like 6 months after they started dating, when Nicholas brought her home for Thanksgiving. She seemed like a nice girl, polite, talked a lot with Susan about college and her plans for the future. Austin also met her that weekend, obviously, because we were all together at home. I didn't notice anything weird at that time. No strange chemistry or weird looks, nothing. She was just his older brother's girlfriend, period. The years passed, and Nicholas and Hannah stayed together. After graduating, they both got jobs in the same city, rented an apartment together, and everything seemed perfect. Nicholas would tell us he was thinking about proposing to her, that he was saving for a ring, that she was the person he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. Susan and I were already getting used to the idea that we'd soon have a daughter-in-law, maybe grandkids in a few years. You know, the normal things parents imagine. Austin, meanwhile, had also graduated and was working in marketing in another city, like 3 hours from where Nicholas lived. He'd come, home sometimes, call us, everything normal. Sometimes he'd mention that he'd visited Nicholas and Hannah, that they'd gone out to dinner together or something, and we loved that the brothers were keeping in touch because, honestly, a lot of families drift apart when the kids grow up and everyone makes their own life. Then last summer came, and everything went to hell. I remember it was July, it was horribly hot, and Nicholas called us on a Saturday night. I answered the phone, and from the first second I knew something was wrong because his voice sounded destroyed, like he'd been crying for hours. He said, "Dad, Hannah and I broke up," and I was like, "What? How? Why?" I asked him what happened, and he just said that Hannah had cheated on him, that he'd discovered messages on her phone, that it had all been a lie. Susan was beside me, and when I told her what happened, she went pale. Immediately grabbed the phone and started talking to Nicholas, asking if he was okay, if he needed us to come, see him. All those things a mother asks when her son is suffering. Nicholas told us he didn't know who the guy was that Hannah had cheated with, that she had refused to tell him, that she'd only admitted the infidelity when he confronted her with the evidence. He told us he'd already packed his things and moved to a hotel, that he couldn't even look at her face. Susan and I were devastated for him, but we also thought, well, these things happen. It's horrible, but he'll get over it. He'll find someone better. Never in a million years would we have imagined who the other man really was. It didn't even cross our minds. Like 2 months passed after that, and Nicholas seemed to be recovering little by little. He'd tell us he was going to therapy, that he was focusing on his work, that he'd started going out with friends again. We were proud of how he was handling the situation, you know, with maturity and without making public dramas. But then, on a Sunday afternoon, Austin showed up at our house without warning. That in itself wasn't so weird. Sometimes he'd come by surprise on weekends, but this time, he brought someone with him. I opened the door and there was Austin with a huge smile on his face, and behind him was Hannah. I froze. I literally couldn't process what I was seeing. Susan came out to see who it was, and when she saw Hannah, her face completely changed, like from confusion to shock to something resembling horror. Austin came into the house like it was nothing, still smiling, and said, "Mom, Dad, I have incredible news. Hannah and I are together and we're getting married." He said it just like that, casual, as if he was announcing he'd gotten a new job or something normal. Susan and I looked at each other, and I think we were both thinking the same thing. This can't be happening. This has to be a bad joke. But it wasn't a joke. Austin was there, with his arm around Hannah, waiting for us to congratulate them or something. I finally found my voice and said, "Austin, what the hell are you doing? Isn't that your brother's ex-girlfriend?" And he said yes, but they already broke up, Nicholas already got over her, and Hannah and I fell in love. We fell in love. Those were his exact words, as if that justified everything. Susan started asking questions. Like, when did this start? How did it start? Does Nicholas know? And Austin told us they'd started officially dating 2 months ago, right after Nicholas and Hannah broke up. He said yes, Nicholas knew, that they'd fought about it, but that Austin believed with time his brother would understand. I was trying to process all this, and then something clicked in my head. 2 months. Hannah cheated on Nicholas in July, and in July Nicholas and Hannah broke up, and now, in September, Austin and Hannah are together and engaged. The math didn't add up and that's when I realized the truth. I asked Austin directly, "You were the guy Hannah cheated on Nicholas with, right?" Austin got tense, and Hannah was looking at the floor. He tried to justify himself, saying that things just happened, that it wasn't planned, that he and Hannah had connected in a special way, and they couldn't deny their feelings. Susan exploded. She started yelling, "How dare he do that to his brother? How could he be so selfish and cruel? What kind of person betrays his own family that way?" Austin got defensive and started saying that his relationship with Hannah had nothing to do with Nicholas, that he had a right to be happy, that he wasn't going to give up the love of his life just because Nicholas was hurt. Hannah stayed quiet the whole time, didn't say a word to defend herself, just stood there looking uncomfortable. I told Austin they needed to leave, that we couldn't talk about this right then because I was too angry. Austin looked surprised, like he genuinely hadn't expected this reaction. I think he thought we'd be happy for him, or at least neutral. They left, and Susan and I just sat there in the living room, completely in shock, unable to believe what had just happened. That night, I called Nicholas. I needed to hear his version of the story. I needed to know how much he knew. When I asked him about Austin and Hannah, there was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then Nicholas told me everything. He told me that when he discovered Hannah had cheated on him, she wouldn't tell him who it was with. But he suspected something because Hannah and Austin had been in contact more than normal the previous months. He told me he'd confronted Austin like a month after the breakup, when he started seeing photos of Austin and Hannah together on social media. He described that conversation between brothers, and it was heartbreaking to hear. Nicholas had told Austin that what he was doing was unforgivable, that he was destroying their relationship as brothers, that he could never see him the same way. And Austin had responded that Nicholas was being dramatic, that eventually he'd get over it, that Hannah and he were happy together and that's what mattered. Nicholas told me, "Dad, I don't have a brother anymore." I told him I was so sorry, that Susan and I were completely on his side, that we weren't going to support this relationship between Austin and Hannah. Nicholas thanked me, but I could hear in his voice that the damage was already done, that it didn't matter what we said or did. Austin had already chosen Hannah over his own family. I hung up the phone and sat with Susan, and she was crying. She told me she couldn't understand how we'd raised a son capable of doing this to his brother, where we'd gone wrong as parents. I didn't have answers to that because I was asking myself the same questions. A few days later, Austin called us, asking if we'd reconsidered our position, saying he really wanted us to come to his wedding. We told him no, that we weren't going to go, that we couldn't celebrate a relationship that was born from betrayal and his brother's pain. Austin got angry and started accusing us of always favoring Nicholas, of never supporting him, of a bunch of things that frankly seemed ridiculous to me considering what he'd done. We told him this had nothing to do with favoritism, that if the situation were reversed, we wouldn't support Nicholas either. But Austin didn't want to listen. He just kept insisting that Hannah and he loved each other and deserved to be happy. Then my father, Nicholas and Austin's grandfather, found out about everything. Someone in the family told him, I don't remember who exactly, but when he called me, I knew he was furious because my dad is the type who doesn't beat around the bush. He asked me if it was true that Austin was going to marry the girl who cheated on Nicholas, and I confirmed that yes. Unfortunately, it was true. My father was quiet for a moment, and then said something I didn't expect. He told me he'd established trust funds for Nicholas and Austin years ago, that each would receive a considerable amount when they turned 30 or when they got married, whichever came first. He told me he was going to revoke Austin's fund, that he wasn't going to allow him to use that money to marry the woman who destroyed his brother. I told him, Dad, it's your decision, but that's going to make things even worse. And my father responded that he didn't care, that actions have consequences, and Austin needed to learn that. A week later, Austin received a formal letter from my father's lawyer, informing him that his trust fund had been revoked. Austin called me hysterical, screaming that this was unfair, that Grandpa couldn't do that to him. I told him yes he could, that it was his money, and he could do whatever he wanted with it. Austin then blamed me, said I'd convinced Grandpa to do this, to punish him. I told him I had nothing to do with Grandpa's decision, that he'd made that decision on his own after learning the truth. But my father didn't stop there. He is, or was, very close to all the extended family, you know. He has siblings, cousins, nephews, a whole big network of relatives, and my father decided they all needed to know exactly what kind of person Austin was. He sent a message, I think by email or something, to the whole family telling them the complete story. He told them Austin had an affair with his brother's girlfriend while they were still together, that he'd destroyed a relationship of more than 4 years, that now he was going to marry her without any remorse. My mother, Judith, the boy's grandmother, was also devastated by all this and completely supported my father's decision to expose what had happened. The family's response was immediate and unanimous. Nobody, and when I say nobody, I mean nobody, was willing to attend Austin and Hannah's wedding. Austin's uncles, cousins, even distant relatives we barely saw at Christmas, everyone said they wouldn't go. Some sent direct messages to Austin, telling him they were disappointed in him, that what he'd done was unforgivable, that he should be ashamed. Others just blocked him on social media and cut off contact completely. It was like a massive family rejection. And although part of me felt bad for Austin because he's my son, another part thought he deserved it, that he needed to understand the magnitude of what he'd done. Hannah apparently wasn't handling all this pressure and rejection well. Austin told us, in one of the few conversations we had after all this, that Hannah was having panic attacks, that she couldn't sleep, that her own family was also questioning the relationship. Hannah's family lived in another state, and at first they didn't know the whole story. But when they found out she'd cheated on her boyfriend of 4 years with his younger brother, they also started to distance themselves. Hannah's mother apparently told her she was disappointed in her, that she hadn't raised her to be that kind of person. Everyone was closing doors on them, and you could see Austin was starting to resent it. But not toward himself or Hannah, but toward us, toward the family, as if we were the villains of the story. Like 3 weeks into all this drama, we got a call from Austin. He sounded tired, defeated. He told us Hannah had canceled the wedding. He didn't say postpone. He said cancel. He explained that Hannah couldn't handle the pressure of having the whole family against her, that she felt judged and attacked all the time, that she'd decided it wasn't worth getting married under these circumstances. Susan asked, and are you still together? I mean, you just canceled the wedding, but you're still in the relationship. And Austin said yes, but I could hear in his voice that he wasn't very sure about that either. Then Austin started blaming us directly for ruining his life. He said that if we had accepted the relationship from the beginning, if we'd supported his decision to be with Hannah, none of this would have happened. He said, Grandpa, never, would have revoked the trust fund, that the family wouldn't have turned against him, that Hannah wouldn't have canceled the wedding. Basically, he was telling us it was all our fault. I lost my patience at that moment and told him, Austin, can you really not see that you created this situation? You decided to sleep with your brother's girlfriend. You decided to continue that relationship knowing the damage you were doing to Nicholas. You decided to try to marry her expecting us all to accept it with a smile. These are the consequences of your decisions, not ours. Austin started yelling that we'd always preferred Nicholas, that we'd never given him the same attention or the same support, that this was just more proof that Nicholas was the favorite son. Susan intervened and told him that was completely false, that we'd always tried to be fair to both, that we'd always been proud of both. But she also told him that what he'd done crossed a line we couldn't ignore, that it had nothing to do with preferences, but with basic values of loyalty and family respect. Austin didn't want to hear any of that. He just kept repeating that we'd ruined his life, that he'd never forgive us, that Hannah was the love of his life, and we'd destroyed his chance to be happy with her. The conversation ended with Austin telling us he didn't want to see us again, that he no longer considered our house his home, that he was basically cutting us out of his life. He hung up the phone before we could say anything else. Susan and I just sat there, processing what had just happened. My younger son was telling me he didn't want anything to do with us anymore because we didn't support his decision to betray his older brother. The irony was almost comical if it wasn't so sad. We told Austin by message, because he wouldn't answer our calls, that if that was his decision, we'd respect it, but that the doors to our house were closed to him as long as he continued not taking responsibility for his actions. We told him he could come back when he was ready to apologize to Nicholas and to us, when he was ready to acknowledge the damage he'd caused. We didn't receive a response. Like 2 months after the wedding cancellation, we found out through Nicholas that Austin and Hannah had broken up. Apparently, Hannah couldn't overcome the weight of everything that had happened, the guilt, the family rejection, all of it. Nicholas told us Hannah had even tried to contact him, that she'd sent him messages saying she was sorry, that she'd made the worst mistake of her life, asking if there was any chance they could talk. Nicholas blocked her immediately. He told us he had no interest in having contact with her again, that that chapter of his life was closed forever. When I found out Austin and Hannah had broken up, I thought maybe that would bring some clarity for Austin. That maybe he'd finally see that everything he'd sacrificed, his relationship with his brother, his relationship with his family, his trust fund, all of that had been for a relationship that didn't even last a year. But no, Austin still blames us. He still says that if we'd supported him, Hannah wouldn't have felt so pressured and they wouldn't have broken up. You can't reason with someone who refuses to see their own responsibility in things. Nicholas, on the other hand, has been rebuilding his life. Like 6 months ago, he met a girl named Kristen. She's 26, and she seems to be a genuinely good person. We've met her a couple times, and we really like her. And most importantly, Nicholas seems happy again. Or at least he's on his way to being happy. He still has difficult days where he thinks about everything that happened, he's told us. But he's in therapy, and he's working on processing all the trauma and betrayal. He told me recently that he's accepted that Austin made his choice, and he has to make his too. That he can't spend more energy being angry or sad about someone who clearly doesn't value the relationship between brothers. Austin still lives in another city, working on his thing, and as far as I know, he's single. We don't have much contact with him, basically none. He sends me a text message for my birthday or Christmas, generic messages like Happy Birthday, Dad, or Merry Christmas, but nothing more. He doesn't come home, doesn't call us, doesn't ask how we are. Susan cries sometimes thinking about him, wondering what we could have done differently, but I tell her we didn't do anything wrong. We raised Austin the same way we raised Nicholas, with the same values, the same opportunities, the same love. What Austin decided to do with that was his choice, not ours. My father, his grandfather, died like 3 months ago. He had a heart attack and it was very quick. He didn't suffer much. Austin didn't come to the funeral. He sent flowers and a card, but he didn't come. Nicholas was there with us, helping us with arrangements, supporting his grandmother Judith, being the son we needed in that moment. Susan told me after the funeral that she felt she'd lost two things that year: her father-in-law and her younger son. I told her Austin was still alive, that there was still hope that someday he'd mature and understand what he did. But honestly, I don't know if I believe that. It's been more than 12 months since all this started, and Austin hasn't shown an ounce of remorse or understanding. The other day, Nicholas asked me if I'd ever forgive Austin if he came and apologized sincerely. I told him honestly I don't know, that I'd want to forgive him because he's my son and he'll always be my son, but that I also can't just forget what he did to his brother, what he did to all of us as a family. Nicholas told me he understood that even if someday Austin apologized, he's not sure he could trust him again or have a real relationship with him. He told me there are certain betrayals that simply break something permanently, and I think he's right. I look back to when the boys were little, playing together in the yard, fighting over silly toys, and I can't believe we ended up here. That one of my sons betrayed the other in the deepest way possible, and then refused to see what was wrong with that. That my family fractured in a way I don't know if it can ever be repaired. Susan and I talk sometimes about what will happen in the future, like if Nicholas marries Kristen, do we invite Austin? If we have grandkids someday, how do we handle that? We don't have answers to those questions yet. The only thing I know for certain is that we support Nicholas 100%, that we did the right thing by not celebrating or validating what Austin did, and that if I had to make that decision again, I'd make it exactly the same. Because at the end of the day, family loyalty and respect between brothers are things you can't ignore just because someone says they're in love. Austin chose his path, and that path took him away from all of us. Now he has to live with those consequences, and we have to find a way to move forward as the broken family we now are.